If you could just introduce yourself, where you went to school, what you studied, and then we'll go from there.
It's great. Thanks so much for inviting me. Thanks to Humera too. I see that she's out there
Mhm.
as well. Um, so I went to Smith College in the 1900s, graduated in 1992. Um, so I was educated in the last century. I was a double major in anthropology and dance, two really
Oh,
useful
wow.
degrees.
Wow. Okay,
Um,
so how was that transition from graduating into the like workforce and the economy?
I so I mean, it's so complex, and then you and I have had sort of brief exchanges too. But so I'm a
Mhm.
professor now at Hunter College at the City University of New York, and so seeing students graduating in the pandemic was like had me reflecting back on what graduating in the spring of 1992 was like, and then with the current civil war that we're basically engaged in. I have been talking a lot to the students just about like graduating into the wake of the first acquittal of the four LAPD officers who had beaten Rodney King. And so we were coming out of that moment, and I was coming out as a student who had like marched on DC and had protested it and done a lot of organizing as a student, as like a woman of color. Um, and the fact that a student is graduating from college now, and the cyclical time of these particular things is something actually that I've been thinking about in a way more than the recession, but um, feeding the world we were entering. We were um, it was going to be hard to find employment, and we were living with like really clear, documented, but nothing like the level nationally that we're seeing right now. Like the sort of national mobilization is amazing. But so that was just a part of like the psyche of like leaving the sort of womb of school in the midst of like radical civil unrest and financial fear, right? Financial like um, insecurity and instability. What's In some ways I've been thinking I'm not that useful for you, because as an artist, like as somebody who works in academia and an artist, I like don't think I'm great at figuring out how to make money, but I've worked my whole life. And so like I was born in Vietnam. I was raised in the US, but I have that sort of first generation immigrant work ethic, like
Mhm.
built like embedded in. So I had a but I also grew up in New England, so I had a paper route when I was little. I raked leaves, I shoveled driveway lawns. My mom was going to make sure that we figured out how to
Mhm.
have income, because we were in the U.S. and you could do that. You couldn't do that in Vietnam. It was
Mhm.
impossible to. So I had always worked um, since I was a kid. Worked in the library, babysitting, all that stuff. So when I got out of school, I wasn't sort of hell bent on I wasn't yet hell bent on the well, definitely not on an anthropological career, but didn't expect my dance career to be a wealth generating pursuit either.
Mhm.
So I drove across the country to Seattle, and my first job out of college was cleaning houses,
Mhm.
which is like not very glamorous, and not something my students want to hear. And not what my mom wanted me, that's not what I was supposed to be doing with my fantastic Smith College education. Um, but it was cash, and it allowed me to be like
Mhm.
dancing, and I was making my own work and joined a company. I also managed a driving school, like
Oh, wow.
a driving academy. Since I had also temped all through high school. So I always joke that the most useful thing I learned in high school was typing. Like that elective class allowed me to go get jobs like through high school, and then even through college. Every summer I would, I would just temp in offices, and so I had good administrative skills. Like, and then because I went to a school like Smith, I had great management skills because I was allowed to be a leader. I was like director of the multicultural women, like the dance company was a women of color, company. And I got to lead, and I got to use a wrench and be a lighting designer and be like a head resident and take care, like be in charge of like an entire house of people. So I got to be on a search for a dean. I got to work with my administration closely. So having that kind of schooling meant I both knew how to just like type fast and things. And I think that was really helpful. I then got cast in a show. I got to perform there. I started to get paid. Equity Union Association. That show toured to Atlanta. I lived in Atlanta. I left Seattle, then I went to Atlanta for 3 months to perform in that show. And then I relocated to New York City, and I've been in New York City since '94. So, but the first thing I did when I hit New York City was get a temp job, and save up a bunch of money, and then not work and dance a whole bunch. And then I joined a dance company, but I also managed a yoga studio.
Oh, wow.
I was also a stripper. Like,
that's awesome.
I was doing a show. I was doing a show of, I was doing, part of it was research. I was doing a show about the ideas of the exotic dancer. And I was like, I'm going to go into that world and like understand it. But I used that to finance a show that was about that, so it was like, and I can say many other things offline about that experience, but it was definitely one of the best paying jobs as a dancer. And then I was touring a lot. And so I started my own dance company, started to write for grants, got commissions, was presented, started to pay other people, took the company on tour, went to Europe, went to Asia. So it's like, it's a wild ride, but I feel like one of the things for me is like the liberal arts approach to a life I find really valuable. Like engaging with every space of like learning is, worthwhile. So yeah, it's I'm trying to think of like other jobs I've had. Yeah, I used to do that. I used to do that. I've toilets, I've scrubbed floors, I've danced around like naked on stage or in Times Square.
That's awesome. Could you maybe, you said how having the liberal arts degree really helped you. Could you unpack that a bit more?
Yeah, I struggle. It's conversation like as a professor in a public, Hunter College is a city university of New York. It's a public school. And it's a BA degree, and we sort of fight sometimes with like the conservatory, like BFA, like building ends in one area. And my sense, at least artistically, is you need to train, but you also need to engage like with the larger conversations of the world. So I'm a big fan of like skilling yourself, but also just the liberal arts approach is like the willingness to engage with a multiplicity of data streams. Like, how do you have a full relationship with, with other aspects of like how a practice intersects with like social justice? How does dance and social work actually, how do those things align? So how do you have a conversation? But on a basic level, just like, how does like film and media studies influence my students' understanding right now of how to assess like Instagram's usefulness as a vehicle for change.
Hmm.
To me, that's liberal arts.
Hmm.
And I mean, I come from a really big family. I have 5 younger brothers and sisters, an older half brother, and like foster like a lot of kin. And to me, and we've, I went back to Smith like years later and got my MFA. So, I'm a big fan of continuing. My mom, when my younger brother went off to Stanford. My mom had then seen 4 kids go to college, and she came to the U.S. with a 6th grade education.
Hmm.
And she was like, "I'm going to get my GED. I'm going to go to community college. I'm going to get my bachelor, which is like in a general education studies." And then she wrote her own memoir about like,
Wow.
that started in an ESL class
Hmm.
and took 20 years to write. And if she didn't have like a general education encounter, and like if there hadn't been space for her, as an immigrant and English as a second language person, like she never would have realized that dream. So I don't know. I'm like a deep believer in education, and I'm a believer in like depth and breadth
Hmm.
when you get into education, like trying to really like understand the the field around you, and also gaining as much like skill and expertise as you can, to be a contributing member of the conversations in the world.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that's like fully unpacking that or not, but
No, this is awesome. I
yeah.
love hearing. I've only heard like a little bit of what you've done and where you've been, but I think whoever has you for a professor is lucky. You have so much to offer, and I can just tell like you really care. You give a shit, and that's like not something you find in every professor, every mentor. So thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you. I'm hearing that back from some students in these days too. I've been doing this, I've been in academia like full time for like 11 years, which is like
Hmm.
and recognizing how much work needs to be done there, but how important education is, and then how much we need to reckon with and abolish.
Hmm.
And like, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, but yeah, but to me, it's just like if you're not grounded in the like in the amplification, emancipation, and like escalation of a student's life to succeed, like yeah, I wish you would get out of the way of the education like
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
I have one last question before we go, but what is one piece of advice or maybe one lesson that you would want to go back and give yourself, maybe when you were graduating or when you were working those temp jobs, and that you
Yeah.
would want to share with your students
Yeah.
today?
I've thought about that because there are times when I think I would have succeeded more artistically if I had, um, but when I look around at my life, I, I talk about this with my mom. It's like I live a wealthy life because the richness of my relationships, keeps me well. So, I mean, one thing is like build your communities thoughtfully and find your kin, like it's not always we don't, I mean, and I love them, but we our families of origin aren't necessarily our best places of support. Mine is, I love it deeply, but I recognize that. So you can't do this alone, and that's really important. I also, when I've done like alumni panels, have been like, try in the beginning to do, this is an improvisational practice, an acting improv practice. It's like you're supposed to say yes and. Like if
Mhm.
somebody throws something at you, you go yes and. You don't go like no but. You don't shut down the thing. If throwing opportunities, try to yes and it, especially in the beginning. It's okay to do things that don't seem to align with the career yet.
Mhm.
Um, but like being in, like, I'm a big fan of like momentum versus inertia. Or in motion, you're more likely to like attract the good stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're like inert, things can just pass you by, you know. So I mean, I'm a little, yeah, I'm into so many different things, and I have found that that has actually worked pretty well for me. So undying curiosity should be like a useful like mantra. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's like educate yourself, and I don't mean degrees. I don't
Mm-hmm.
mean credentials. I mean, like, you know, keep looking for places to learn, find people who are smarter than you to help you out, and don't be like, this is something I didn't do, which I think is important, which is ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
Like, ask for help, find people who've worked some part of the system ahead of you or before you, and ask for advice. I've been beautifully mentored by folks, but I think I could have gotten tuned in faster if I had just acknowledged a little bit of vulnerability and just asked for a little assistance. That's a lot of advice.
No, this is great. I appreciate you so much for being on this interview series.